One of the biggest problems I had when I first learned how to play, when I started playing in church and stuff, was the praise break. Now, I knew somewhat, and I started to learn how to get into it and how to do the half step walk ups, and sometimes how to get out of it, or a particular route, a particular section that you would play. But you know how we have the main part of the praise break where we're just doing just the main full out shout. I never got that. I didn't understand how that worked. What do you play during that part? I know how to get there, but during that part, I could do a bunch of other stuff, but I just didn't know what to do. So what do we do during the actual praise break? How do we play? I'm Chris Moses, and this is Gospel Progressions University. So let's take a look at the context of the shout. When I say what I just played, what you just saw was in D flat, but the key isn't necessarily D flat major. The tonal center is D flat major, and people get this confused. The harmonic or tonal center is around D flat major. D flat diatonic. Diatonic means just strictly staying to the notes that are in the major scale or whatever scale they may be in. Let's just say D flat. D flat would diatonically would be all these notes here in D flat major, along with its associated chords. D flat being 1, E flat minor, F minor, G flat major, A flat major, B flat minor, C diminished, and D flat major, right? So we would say that, and automatically a person unwittingly would say, well, those are the chord choices that I have because it's in D flat major. But when you listen to what I played, you may have a different approach. You may say, wait a minute, this doesn't sound so much like it's a major key. It sounds like it's in a minor key. So you may go ahead and say, well, let's play D flat minor. Then you quickly begin to realize, hold on a second, this is not D flat minor. So what key is it in? Is it D flat major or D flat minor? And that's where the confusion is. That's what happened to me until I figured out what I'm going to show you. What your ear is listening for is some sort of harmonic progression towards a key center. If you think of the key center as, say, the sun, and this is the earth, well, the music you're playing and whatever chords you're using is going to needs to revolve around that. You could leave that and revolve around something else. But in this particular case, we're revolving around the harmonic of D flat major, which would be D flat, F, and A flat. So we can use certain chord patterns and certain approaches to show and to illustrate that. So based on what I was playing, there are 4 basic chord structures, or I can say a basic chord structure of shout. There's a lot of things that people incorporate. So this type of shout, this is a basic element of a shout. So now let's look at the 4 chords here. We have 4 chords, and then we have 2 scales. And then we have a bass line, 1 and 5. I'll explain. Now our first set of chords, the first one is gonna be minor 1 and minor 2. The second chord is gonna be a diminished chord and a major 1 chord. If you take the approach of what key is this in, and you're looking at it diatonically, you say, well, this is the key of D flat major or D flat minor, you're gonna be in trouble because what I just played doesn't fit in it like a hand in a glove. Because harmonically, we're trying to set up a particular sound that we're looking for. We're revolving around the harmonic of D flat. So that's our first chord. There's no major key that has a minor key for the first root note. It wouldn't be major. And then we have our minor. And this pattern repeats. You have this here, minor 1, minor 2, inverted minor 1, and then an inverted minor 2, inverted minor 1, inverted minor 2, and then right back to root position minor 1 and root position minor 2, and ad infinitum, it goes on. If you notice that it builds out on a pattern, that's the pattern, minor 1, minor 2, minor 1, minor 2. So that's the first thing we have, and you may have heard it before, like a shout or a type of, like one of those songs, that congregational worship songs that you'll hear in church during praise and worship. So that's the first thing that we have here. Now, of course, we have our diminished and our major. And so with the diminished and the major, they're revolving around the diminished 1. When I say the first chord is going to be diminished, or this would be the third chord technically, chord 3 and then chord 4. So you'd have your diminished seventh here, and really what would be a dominant seventh. And again, you wouldn't find this in a major chord or a major key diatonically, and it revolves around D flat, F, and A flat harmonically. So with those 4 chords, minor 1, minor 2, and a diminished 1 and a dominant 1. So moving on from that, now we can look at the scales that are associated with it. Again, we have scales that are related to church or gospel music, and this is commonly used in this type of arena here. So we have our D flat major blues scale. Again, and our D flat minor blues scale. So it'll be 1, flat 2, or flat 3 rather, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7, minor 7, and back to 1. That's our minor. Our major is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and, or 1, 2, minor 3, 4, 5, 6, and back to 1. So those are the 2 scales. So we know what our 4 chords are. We know what our 2 scales are. So now let's take it the bass line and where that lands. So with the shout, the bass line is going to be built off of the 1 chord and a 5 chord, or the 1, and then we have the going up to here, the 5, the interval. And the way it is, it's done rhythmically. As far as time goes, there are going to be 8 beats if you count it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and back to 1 again. Notice though that the strong beats and the down beats for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, I'll play it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 5 on the downbeats. So if it was played faster, it gives more emphasis to that versus any other of the notes, because it's chromaticism that's being used. Chromaticism meaning that there's a half-step approach on the weak beats to approach the strong downbeats, where you want the emphasis of the key center. We're not going to place, if we're looking at D flat as our key center, why would we place emphasis on an A or G or B or C or any other note except something that is harmonic to where we're going? We want to resolve on D flat. So 1, 5, 1. So it's strong beat 1, 2, 3, weak beats 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and so on. So that's how that's built, off of those 2 notes, just the 1 and the 5, the 5th interval of D flat, depending on which way you're going, 1 and 5 or 1 and 4. But we're in D flat, so it'll be 1 and 5. So we have our melody scales and our harmonic structure. Melody and tones, pretty much the same thing. So tonally, we're looking at D flat. So when we look at this here, notice that we're playing with that first set of chords inverted. We're playing part of the major blues scale. Okay, with that. But there's a major sound. Even with most of the notes that we play, these first 2 resolve right back to D flat. It uses that as a melodic home bass. So we have that, and spelling out part of the major blues scale. So along with the tonal structure or melodic structure, we're going to use that and create a rhythm that would support that. So for example, you have the 1, 6, 5, 6, 1, which basically looks a lot like D flat major. So in a person's ear, what they're hearing, they're going to hear, well, this sounds like a D flat major, until you start doing this, and then they get lost. Because again, we're not looking at it diatonically. We're looking at what it's revolving around. So we're not paying attention so much to the key signature. It isn't important. It's good to know that, because you know what chords are where in relation to the first chord or the root of the scale. But we're looking at what it sounds like, or we're listening to what it sounds like, which is more important. So if you notice here, D flat, these are all diatonic to the key of D flat major. If this was played in D flat minor or C sharp minor, you'd have these 2 notes here, not these 2. So we're thinking major. So we have our 1, 1, 2, 1, and then 6, 5, 6, back to 1 again. So that pattern, we can build it, which is built off of and largely based off of the major blues scale. Again, when I say that based off of it, it isn't that we're only using the major blues scale, but the air, what it's implying to the air, because there are notes there. Some of it, it's not being played. For example, we're not playing the E. We can, but we're not because of the pattern that we're looking at. That 1-6-5-6-1 pattern is indicative of the major blues scale. So we spoke about this, these chords here, the minor 2 and the minor 1, and this builds a harmonic structure that we see isn't too tense because it only goes off a part of the major blues scale. Okay, so we have of course this note and this note here that belongs to the major blues scale, and we have this note that belongs to the minor blues scale. So we have most of these notes here that go with the major blues scale, and we're not really using the F, which is a part of the major blues scale. So we're going in between the major and the minor blues scale. But we notice that there's a lack of tension to resolve so much to a major chord, because we hear this, our ears are going to think it's going to want to resolve here. You hear this all the time, and your ear wants to resolve here. Now, well, how to fix that or how to change that, we move on to the next harmonic structure, the ones we learned about, which would be the diminished chord, taking us right back to the 1 chord. Our diminished and our 1. And I'll show you what I'm doing here in my left hand in a second. So we have this here. This is a diminished 1 chord, right back to another 1 chord. Okay, the technical chord for this would be a major 6 chord, but for all intents and purposes, just F, A flat, B flat, and D flat, right? So we can do this here. Or we have a choice. We can do this here and make it dominant if we want to. We can go either note, because again, both of them come from either blues scale. We're mixing and we're matching, taking the blues scale, the 2 that we know, and finding the notes that aren't in one and using it in the other one. The other one, the notes that aren't in the other one, we're using it in the first one. So we mix and match. So in other words, what isn't in the D flat major blues scale, we use it in the minor blues scale. And so forth and so on, and etc., and vice versa. So now, with that, we have our tritones. The tritones now, it's what part of I like to call the rhythm section of the shout. So if you notice in the example, I'm playing, that gives you the tritone that leads up to the dominant chord. And why that works so well is because the tritone wants to resolve normally up its 4th. And what that means is, or 5th, depending on which direction. This would be the tritone for G. We're not playing with G flat. We're not playing any chords that necessarily relate to G flat, but it wants to resolve here to this F and B. So because of that missing sound, it wants to constantly resolve, and this is all we need. So it gives the ear a nice push forward to listen. Normally I'll fill it with that, but, and these incidentally work with the blues scale as well, minor blues scale, and then we have our major blues scale that they're part of as well. And dominant. So we can structure our chords like this: diminished chord to a minor, to a major chord. We have our dominant chord here, which would be this is here makes it a 13th, but for the scope of this video, don't worry about the nomenclature. Just understand that I'm making this a dominant chord. So we have our E diminished 7th or D flat diminished 7th, like we saw in the last video with the shout, or with the preacher chords. So it resolves there as well. And this is where we could just have our rhythm again. Implying D flat major or D flat as its tonal center. This as well. And that's why when you play a shout, this is what you're hearing between the 2. That's me playing it as slow as I possibly can. But the point here is to understand the relationship between the rhythm, between the bass line is, and between what our harmonics are, as far as notes, how they relate to either the blues scale, major blues scale, or the minor blues scale. You can do this. It's not as hard as it seems. You just need to remember these few key points here. So shout music is built off of one, a harmonic theme. All right, we know that we're using it in the context of a harmonic center. Secondly, we see that we start with 2 chords. We have our minor 1 and our minor 2. Next, we have a peak tension. We have a tension that builds up to spell out, hey, the next chord, because diminished chords tend to want to go somewhere. The next chord is going to be a dominant chord. That's where it wants to go. And finally, everything is built around both major and minor blues scales. If you haven't gotten my free guide, I don't know what you're waiting for. You can check out my website where I go a little bit deeper into these concepts. It's at gospelprogressions.university.com. The link's right here. /Gospel Keys Pro. You can check out the link in the description. God bless you, and I will see you in the next video.